On the night of 31st May 2009, Air France flight AF447 lifted off from Rio de Janeiro, bound for Paris Charles de Gaulle. Aboard the Airbus A330-203, registered FGZ-CP, were 216 passengers and 12 crew members, 228 people in total. Hours into the crossing, the aircraft settled into cruise at approximately 38,000 feet, its pitch attitude close to the upper boundary of its operational envelope. At cruise altitude over the Intertropical Convergence Zone, in a convective, moisture-laden air mass, supercooled droplets and ice crystals began obstructing the Pitot probes, degrading the measured airspeed. The aviation community had encountered Pitot icing before, but the full consequences of a total airspeed loss at cruise altitude remained poorly understood. When the autopilot disconnected, the crew inherited an aircraft nudging the edge of its flight envelope. With degraded sensor data they had not yet been given reason to distrust. At 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 5 seconds into the flight, the Pitot probes almost certainly became obstructed by ice crystals. The obstruction announced itself through contradiction. The speed indications the aircraft's computers were receiving no longer agreed with one another. That cascade of inconsistent data was enough to trigger the next step. The autopilot disconnected. What the crew inherited in that moment was not a clear emergency, but a cockpit that had reorganized itself around ambiguous information, faulty speed readings, automatic systems dropping offline, and a flight envelope that was no longer being protected in the way the crew had been trained to expect. Ambiguity at the source of a warning system does not stay contained. It spreads forward in time, shaping how every subsequent alert will be received. At 2:10:04, the airspeed reading on the first officer's primary flight display began to drop, the first sign that the Pitot data feeding the aircraft's protective systems had become unreliable. 6 seconds later, at 2:10:10, the stall warning sounded. It lasted 3 seconds, then stopped. A warning that vanishes on its own invites a specific and dangerous interpretation: that the system, not the aircraft, was momentarily at fault. 41 seconds later, at 2:10:51, the stall warning triggered again, this time because the angle of attack had genuinely crossed the aerodynamic threshold. When the autopilot disconnected, the two co-pilots called out the loss of airspeed indications. They had identified the problem, at least by name. But identifying a failure and knowing what to do with it are not the same thing. Neither co-pilot called out the unreliable IAS procedure, and neither executed it. There was no explicit ECAM message to close the gap, no system-level alert that named Pitot probe obstruction or airspeed inconsistency as the source of what was unraveling. Into that diagnostic vacuum, the pilot flying acted on instinct. As the aircraft momentarily lost altitude and vertical speed fell, he pulled the nose up. Investigators would later characterize this as a startle response, the emotional shock of sudden autopilot disconnection at high altitude, in unfamiliar control laws, with no clear picture of what had gone wrong. The nose-up inputs were not small corrections. They were large, at times driven to the stop, and they drove the angle of attack sharply upward. The pitch attitude increased by 8 degrees. Those inputs destabilized the flight path in both roll and pitch, compounding the instability that had begun with the airspeed loss. When the stall warning triggered, in response to the rising angle of attack, the crew reacted with strong pitch-down inputs, then climbed again, the aircraft oscillating as the pilots struggled to decode what they were seeing. Then the stall warning stopped. The cockpit fell quiet. And in that silence, with no sustained alarm, no procedure called, no system message naming the cause, the crew had only their own interpretation to fall back on. The absence of a follow-up warning did not confirm safety. It confirms nothing. But it provided the conditions in which the crew could quietly file the first alert away as a product of the sensor anomaly. Transient, unreliable, resolved. The captain had joined the crew late, after a rest break, leaving 2 co-pilots to manage the aircraft through the critical early phase of the emergency, a command arrangement that blurred the chain of authority at precisely the moment clarity was most needed. Each input, each correction, each hesitation in the cockpit carried the weight of an unspoken question: whose judgment should prevail? That underlying uncertainty did not cause the stall warning to be misread, but it shaped the environment in which any unified response would have to take root. At 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 51 seconds, the stall warning returned. This time, it did not vanish after 3 seconds. The warning sounded continuously for 54 seconds, accompanied within 2 seconds by high-frequency vibrations consistent with stall buffet. The aircraft was in a genuine aerodynamic stall. The angle of attack had crossed the variable threshold calculated for the measured Mach value. The pilot flying registered the buffeting and the aerodynamic noise not as the signature of a stall, but as evidence of excessive speed, a reading reinforced by the speed trend arrow on the primary flight display, which at that moment indicated acceleration. The alarm that had cried wolf 41 seconds earlier had done its quiet damage. By the time the real warning arrived, the crew's confidence in the system had already been spent. Neither co-pilot acknowledged the warning aloud, and neither made reference to the buffeting now moving through the airframe. The crew never formally identified the situation as a stall, not then and not in the seconds that followed. The pilot flying's response was to select toga thrust and pull the nose up, inputs that moved the aircraft further into the stall rather than out of it. Rapid, full amplitude roll inputs followed, and the pitch attitude climbs to 11 degrees in 10 seconds, driving the angle of attack still higher. The pitch attitude climbs to approximately 16 degrees nose up as the aircraft reached its maximum altitude near 38,000 feet. The angle of attack surged past 40 degrees, a value so far outside normal parameters that the aircraft's aerodynamic lift had effectively collapsed, while the vertical speed reached approximately negative 10,000 feet per minute. Even as the aircraft plummeted, the pitch attitude and angle of attack remained excessive, the descent uncontrolled, the engines running at nearly full thrust. The final recorded data captured the precise geometry of impact. Pitch attitude of 16.2 degrees nose up, a slight left roll of 5.3 degrees, and a vertical speed of negative 10,912 feet per minute. At the moment of contact with the Atlantic, the aircraft was structurally intact, flaps retracted, engines at high RPM, and the horizontal stabilizer held near its maximum pitch-up position. Medical examination of recovered victims told the same story the flight data did. Spinal column compression fractures and pelvic injuries consistent with the forces of a high-speed vertical impact transmitted upward through the seats. At 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 28 seconds, the aircraft struck the Atlantic Ocean. The recordings ended there, at that moment, with the sequence complete. Investigators working back from that endpoint found the fulcrum of the accident not in the sustained warning the crew ignored, but in the brief one that had already taught them not to listen. A warning system earns its authority over time and loses it in seconds. At the moment the sustained stall warning sounded, the crew did not identify the approach to stall condition and did not execute appropriate recovery procedures. Training on the unreliable airspeed procedure had covered immediate memory items and a pitch and thrust reference table, but it had not prepared crews to connect an unexpected stall warning to that procedure during the compressed chaos of autopilot disconnection. The simulator offered no help. The developed stall regime was absent from the data packages entirely, and the buffet that would have announced a full stall to a crew's hands and feet was never reproduced in the training environment. Research in electrophysiology had already shown that under heavy cockpit workload, when visual and oral information compete, pilots tend to favor what they can see, and in doing so, they may filter out a critical oral warning. Scanning instruments, processing contradictory indications, and managing unfamiliar flight law. These were precisely the conditions under which the auditory channel loses to the visual one. Investigations into earlier unreliable airspeed incidents had already documented 9 separate cases in which stall warnings activated during similar events. Yet the system-level lesson about warning credibility was never translated into explicit crew guidance. Standard alert fatigue models focus on warnings that come too often. They have no framework for warnings that come once, disappear, and then return with full force. The transient alarm that poisons trust in its own successor. The accident report identified this explicitly. The appearance of transient warnings early in the event was listed among the reasons the crew did not act on the stall warning when it mattered. Training gaps, simulator limitations, and the absence of a cockpit display showing airspeed inconsistencies all converged at the same moment, leaving the crew without the tools, the cues, or the mental model to recover.